All right, you guys, we're going to get started. I am so excited to welcome you to this special event tonight. My name is Sigrid Lindholm. I work on the ministry care team at St. Mary's Press, and I am just thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to help facilitate this conversation this evening. I'll be moderating the discussion. I also am just super thrilled to be able to talk about the state of religion in young people, specifically this Catholic edition that Springtide Research Institute just recently published. I'm very grateful to Dr. Josh Packard, who's joining us for this important discussion tonight. As you probably already saw in the keynote, Josh is the executive director of Springtide Research Institute. He is a sociologist who's been studying trends in American religion in order to see for those who care about young people to be able to care better. We also have with us Julie Mickler, and Julie is also a member of the ministry care team. She has 30 years experience working in Catholic education and ministry. She joined St. Mary's Press in 2014 and serves currently as an instructional designer, e-learning consultant, author and editor, and supports all of our Catholic high schools. I also am excited that Maureen is part of our discussion. Maureen is also on our ministry care team. We pretty much have the entire no, I'm kidding. No. We have a very large ministry care team. Maureen has served professionally in ministry for almost 3 decades in parish, regional, and diocesan settings in areas of adolescent ministry, catechesis, liturgy, and pastoral ministry. She's authored and contributed to many publications, including ones for the diocese she's worked in, NFCYM and St. Mary's Press. So welcome to our panelists. A few rules of the road here, because it's a discussion and because it's a virtual discussion, we're going to take advantage of the full suite of Zoom tools that we have. So if you see, we already have the chat box going, and that's wonderful for conversation. As we go, you'll notice a Q&A box in the lower portion of your screen. What I would love is if you have a question that comes up or any question as we go, please put it in there, and then I'll be able to share that with Maureen, Julie, and Josh as we go and have them respond to it. We'll try to get to all your questions. It might be hard, but if we don't, we're definitely going to be following up with you guys because this is too important to not. So we care deeply about the good work that you do. And our role here is to serve as St. John Baptist de La Salle served his fellow teachers. And we are inspired by his work. So thank you guys for your good work to start with. And we're going to have Julie lead off with kind of a, well, actually, Maureen and Julie, what I'd love for you guys to do is just kind of share a little bit about what you thought of the keynote presentation.
Okay, well, I'll go first. The hour-long went so quick, Josh. It was really engaging and so easy to listen to, and I had to keep like stopping to process and write down some notes. And I think what I walked away from at the end of the keynote is hope and optimism and new energy around this idea of how are we going to approach this disaffiliation? Everyone's hearing about the nuns, the NONES group that have no affiliation. And I think what it's done for me to listen to the keynote and look into some of the research is to just take a step back and take a breath and realize there's nothing to panic about. There is no crises with which we got to pull out all of our fire extinguishers to put out. Quite the opposite. It's just take a deep breath and do what we do naturally, which is care for the young people in front of us. The 5 aspects of the relational authority are things we are already so good at. We're listening, integrity, care, transparency, and expertise. And if we lean into those 5 qualities, the young people in front of us are going to find a place to belong. Those qualities encourage us to reach out to parents if we work in parishes. I work with Catholic high schools, and I think every teacher that's been good that I know has all 5 of those qualities in spades. And I think when I was listening to the keynote and thinking about relational authority in a high school classroom or an academic setting, what it draws me to is memories of teachers who did relational authority really well. And I'm thinking of a science teacher that I worked with, Joyce, and I would sit in on her classroom because she was just the popular teacher. And I learned pretty early on that if you're a popular teacher, it means you're a good teacher, you're a master teacher. And what that means essentially is that kids walked out of her classroom knowing they belonged, knowing that they mattered. And I would I can remember walking down the hallway with her and we were chatting. And every second or third student that we would pass, she knew their name. She knew what activities they were involved in. She asked them about their grandmothers. She invested in those students and in their lives, and they loved her for it. And when they love you, when they belong in your classroom, their minds and their hearts are open to your expertise. So I'm remembering the wonderful teachers in my life, the wonderful youth ministers, the people that brought me to 30 years of ministry and education, and I'm going to invoke them to help guide us along the way. So thanks for your keynote, Josh. It was inspiring and has me really thinking about a lot of new things.
It makes me think about teachers I've had too. That's a really good way of putting it. I think we can all think of examples like that, right? Hopefully.
Right? Yeah.
I definitely think so. I definitely think so. We've all, had those wonderful adults in our lives. For me too, Josh, it was awesome. I sat there and took notes and paused as I went along and restarted and went back, and it was just so rich and there was so much. And I love that it was a video because it allowed me to do that. So It was great. So what I want to do is kind of take you through my thought process because I took notes, and there were 4 bullet points that kind of really stood out to me from the research. Then I have my takeaways, which kind of reads more like an examination of conscience. So I'm sorry for being so Catholic, but but I like to always bring it back to me and where I'm at, and then I have 3 questions for, well, how can we move forward for ourselves, and no matter what area of ministry we're in. And so the things that kind of jumped out at me was that young people are more likely to take advice from someone who cares about them. So it's not that you have a PhD or that, you've been a youth minister for 30 years or, it's about adults who care about them and who make them feel like they know that, A third of the affiliated young people do not think it's important to have a faith community. And that just kills me, I have to be honest, because the faith community for me and being that age was so central and so life-giving. But it makes me wonder, have they even had an experience, a real experience of the faith community with its impact and all of its goodness and all of its benefits? It's a good question, I think, right? The third thing was only 6% of religious leaders are considered adults that they could talk to if needed. That kills me too. It's like, wow, okay, so that's a trust issue. What can we be doing to build trust and build relationship? And then lastly, what matters in the lives of young people for religious identity and affiliation is relationships. This is what they're telling us, right? So it's the individuals that make the difference, not the institutions. And that young people are telling us that the people there help me to feel like I belong because I have a connection with them. So when we look at, oh my gosh, they're not coming to Mass. Well, what connection do they have within the community of people who go to that Mass, right? That's the key. My takeaways, young people feel that nobody cares and nobody's listening. This, as church, should really make us squirm. I think about our own families. If there was a child or a young person in our own families who said, I feel like no one really cares about me and no one's really listening to me or hears me, oh my gosh, we would respond immediately, right? And we would just circle around that child or that young person and really want to love on them. And yet here we have all of these young people, right? And the research was from 13 to 23, right? And all of these young people who are feeling like this should make us squirm, you know? So it's like, what can we do? How are we currently caring about our young people? How are we showing them care? What are we consistently doing to show them that? And how are we listening, right? The next thing was that young people don't find faith relevant, that they're not interested or engaged. And I think here's an opportunity for us to flip it. Because when we think about a relationship is a two-way street, right? It's not just about them having interest in us as a faith community. What are we as a faith community and members of that faith community? What are we doing to make them feel relevant to us? It's a big question, right? And what can we start doing to help them feel like they're relevant to us? And how are we showing that we're consistently and genuinely interested in them? Or are we only interested in who we want them to be? So what can we start doing to show that we're truly, genuinely interested in them? And then how engaged are we in their lives? Right? So what can we start doing there? It reminds me a lot of Jesus in the Gospels. I've always, throughout my whole career in ministry, I hate to use the word career, vocation of ministry, I've always looked back to the Gospels and how Jesus modeled ministry for us. And I figured, you know, if it works for him, it might work for us. And what did he start out with? You know, he didn't build this beautiful little structure on the Mount of Beatitudes and say, okay, come visit me every week. Because you know what, let's be honest, you and I would not be here. He started by going out to where the people were. He went down by the seashore or the lake, you know, the lake shore. And he got into the boats and he went fishing, right? And he was always inviting himself to everybody's house for dinner. I love that. It's like, you know, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. I'm having dinner at your house tonight. Okay. You know, so he started to hang out where people were. He started to get to know them. They started to get to know him, built trust, built relationships, helped them to feel like they mattered to him, right? The next thing that we see in the Gospels are all of the healing stories, right? Because let's be honest, if we want people to really grow and be evangelized, and it's what Julie was talking about, you know, with that teacher who, you know, once the relationship was built and that care was all there, your heart was opened, right? And there's that trust and there's that healing, right? I mean, then you get hungry because then you want to know more, you know, you want to spend more time with this person. And that's hopefully that's what we do with Jesus. And in the Gospels, we see that people get hungry and they want to learn more, and they're just filled with gratitude. And, you know, Lord, teach us to pray, you know, and then we see the catechesis coming in, right? We see the Beatitudes, we see the parables where Jesus is teaching us about what the kingdom of God is like. But all of that foundation of relationship is necessary for that evangelization to take place. You know, and all of it leads us to the Paschal mystery, but yet Jesus does not start there. He doesn't start with the Eucharistic discourse, you know, he just doesn't. Why do we, you know, why are we doing that? You know, so it's like getting back to the relationships and having that balance. So I'm not saying let's get rid of all of our catechesis and theology and all of that, not at all. But how can we look at what we're already doing, right? And make room for relationship, where relationship is just as important. Because let's be honest, our whole faith tradition is based on a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's relationship. And God himself is in relationship, the Trinity, right? So I think we have a lot to learn there, you know. And so 3 questions for moving forward for me were, how will we shift to better show care and actively listen and engage and build and nurture a relationship with the people that have been entrusted to us in our call to ministry? You know, we know that the only transformation that we have control over really is our own transformation, the transformation within ourselves. So how committed am I to listening, to really listening, and to changing my mindset? And then thirdly, if we want to encourage growth and see transformation in others, We must commit to the growth and transformation within ourselves first. And in the words of what's known as the prayer of St. Francis, he says, let it begin with me. And so those are the things that kind of popped out at me and made me think about and my thought process as I was listening to Josh's tremendous keynote that I will continue to go back to.
Yeah, I think we just continue this conversation here where people tell me how great the keynote was. I like where this is headed.
It's all good. It's all good.
All right, we have some really great questions, so we're going to move to these questions, and I think I'm going to pose this to all three of you. It says, hi there, love everything being said, so good job, you guys. My biggest source of anxiety in working with today's youth is how do we meet them where they are, fish with them, share meals with them, when so much of what they see, believe, feel now is counterintuitive to the doctrine of our faith.
I'm really curious about how Maureen and Julie and others would approach this. I'm not trying to be snarky or flippant here. I don't necessarily see the problem. I mean, I think the questioner is correct that a lot of what they see, believe, and feel is probably counterintuitive and counter to the doctrine of the Catholic faith. But I don't see anything at least in my understanding of the New Testament, and I am a sociologist, not a New Testament scholar, but I don't see Jesus that being a barrier between being in relationship with people. And especially with young people who can't possibly, at 13, 14, 15 years old, be held accountable for those kinds of influences, which they have very little control over, and certainly not the brain chemistry to be able to sift through on their own, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's you go to those places. I mean, you go to the places where they're experiencing and seeing and doing those things.
You do, and
I've not ever been responsible for faith formation for a young person, so I'm curious.
I think too, Josh, it really depends strongly on the kind of environment that we create when we gather with them. Let's just start there, So in meeting them where they're at in terms of what they believe and their thoughts and all of that, in my experience, I've always tried to create an environment where they knew that they could say whatever's on their heart or mind or whatever they're struggling with, and I wasn't going to sit there in judgment. And what I did for the groundwork that I would lay is that, you know what, guys, there have been times in my life where I've questioned things and I've doubted things, that are contradictory to what the church teaches. And a lot of it was because I really didn't understand, or I was in a different part in my life, different stage of my life. So it didn't make sense to me, and that's okay. And I think if we can give young people the permission to just be able to sit with it and question it and doubt it and have that be okay, but to remind them that we're not going to be stuck there forever. I mean, our lives evolve and they move, and there will come a time where, we'll go deeper with something and search for something. And that's definitely part of the whole spiritual process. We want to encourage our young people to question. Let's not be afraid of the questions. Let's not be afraid of the doubt, and to say, let's look at that. Let's talk about that. And even if you are not on board with what the church teaches about that right now, it's okay. It's okay. We as church need to tell our young people that.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the same lines. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, please, Julie.
That I just would be careful about determining ahead of time what young people believe, see, or feel as being counterintuitive. Our central teaching is love one another as I have loved you. I would start there. And I think a lot of young people, because they feel judged by the institution or by people of the institution, then they have just shut out, and they're going to throw around terms like atheist and I'm against this and I'm against that, because they as human beings haven't been loved and accepted by someone in the institution or who's in authority, that they haven't been embraced as a child of God. And I just wonder if we don't lead with love and lead with embracing and lead with listening if those counterintuitive thoughts or beliefs might just trickle away. And if we can't just agree that to love one another is the central teaching of the church, it's central to what Jesus showed us in the Gospels, and see where we would go from there.
And then the only other thing I would add is in terms of going out and being where they're at. Where are your families? Where are the children and the young people? Where are they? Where are they hanging out? Where are they hanging out on a Friday night? Are they at the pizza joint in town? Then go hang out at the pizza joint in town on Friday night with your own family, you know, and rub elbows. You know, are a lot of the, you know, young people involved in a you know, Irish dancing, or I mean, you know, what are they involved in? And go and support them and make sure that, you know, you let them know that that you're there. Bring them a carnation, you know, encourage them. That makes a huge impression because we're showing them that we care about what's important to them, right?
Agreed. Actually, Laura commented to us panelists saying, so funny, I have no desire to be anywhere on social media and my students wanted me to start a TikTok. And actually, I kind of love that because it shows that her students are inviting her to join them in their space, like in their kind of third space. Like
that's huge.
This is a place
that says a lot
where...
about you for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I started when I was in the classroom. I started my Facebook page because a student took a picture in our classroom, and they're like, "I posted it to my Facebook page," and I didn't. This was like 2008 or 2009. I didn't even know what hardly Facebook was, but that's how I started my Facebook account. And
speaking of social media, Julie, I'd love your take on one of the questions we received. Was, is it social media? Is it the internet? Students are disengaging with the real world and over engaging with social media and kind of virtual world. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, certainly my thoughts during a pandemic are vastly maybe just influenced by my thoughts are influenced by the pandemic. I think that social media is real to them, even though we all know that the Facebook pictures or Instagram pictures are really staged and not necessarily natural, but that doesn't mean that they aren't real. And I think knowing how influenced young people are by their social media connections, that we don't serve ourselves well by telling them they're not real, or by dismissing it as being unimportant or even damaging or anything negative at all. I think we engage with them. You know, Laura's entertaining a TikTok or even just learning more about it, an openness to say, what's TikTok? I don't even know. Shows an interest in their lives. And we have to have an openness to that. And not that we engage with our young people on social media, but I think it's important to understand what the now sorts of apps and places are, and be able to talk about them. If we don't have an openness to them and how important they are, we're going to shut the door on that part of a relationship with young people.
Josh, can you speak to, does any of the Springtide research talk about the influence of social media and internet in like loss of I don't know, human connection or importance of values?
Well, I mean, so it's complicated, right? It's I don't mean that as a cop out. What I mean is that, look, this is a brand new way of communicating, and it's a brand new way of making community. And what do we always need when we have brand new ways of making community? Well, we need social norms. And so a lot of the sort of like the scatter shot that you hear from young people, where it seems terrible and it seems everything and it seems important and it seems nothing and all that at the same time, is because they're really casting around looking for like guidance in this space. And some of that is just like stuff they're going to have to figure out, in the same way that, you know, your grandparents might have, well, my grandparents figured out phone etiquette back in the day. Party, you know, as they transitioned literally from party lines in northern Minnesota to individual lines, and how long did you stay on the phone? You can go back, if you have a desire to, you can go back and search through the articles and newspaper things written at the time about how the phones were, causing young people to stay indoors all day and ruining their eyes and damaging their social skills. There will be something that these kids will worry about when they are parents too, for their own kids. Well, our job is not to pass judgment on these things, I don't think. I mean, you can if you want to. It's not going to do you any good, though. It's what we need to do is help guide them through this. What does a healthy relationship look like anywhere? And I want to make sure we don't get too bogged down in this space, because the prevailing research here across all these technologies across time, and especially what our young people are saying in the Springtide research, is that it matters far less where you show up. So rather than this being like a laundry list of tips and tricks and like what platforms you should be on, et cetera, it matters a lot more how you show up. And so you can build a thriving ministry just in face-to-face stuff at a coffee shop. You can build a thriving ministry on Minecraft if you want to. I'm convinced that all of that can be done, and I've seen all of that being done. But the consistent thing that all those things have in common is the way that people show up in those spaces, wherever it is that they choose to be.
Very nice.
And
All right, Maureen.
One more quick
Oh,
thought,
yes,
sorry. That whatever it is that we may not understand about a young person's life, when we're open to it, I think it gives them permission then to be more critical about it. If I'm critical first, they're going to defend that social media involvement to the death.
Right.
But if I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. How does this work? And tell me about those connections. That openness will invite them to then go, yeah, but you know what? Everybody's can be really false. And those Instagram pictures are so da-da-da. And that's, that welcome just gets you to those deeper levels.
Help them interrogate it. And in the same way that you want them to take their faith seriously, you need to take their TikTok seriously. And it doesn't mean you have to be on TikTok and like do all the challenges, but it's in a way that this is important to your life. Cheerleading, TikTok, after school, whatever it is, like those things are important to them. I know you all know this. I'm just saying that it is important that we convey that, because the dominant experience of young people is being ignored by adults, not being judged necessarily or told that they're wrong. It is flat out being ignored. And the more that we shine light on the fact that I'm paying attention to you, the better off you're going to be in the long run in terms of the relationship. So young people told us this time and time again, that the dominant experience that they have with adults is just being dismissed.
Wonderful. We have a question from Denise. Maureen, what are your thoughts about caring or listening inside the sacramental framework? Our sacraments seem to be a consumer provider model that's somewhat different than caring and listening, the accompaniment of young people to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
No,
Maureen, why do you think the Catholic Church should ditch the sacraments? Go ahead.
Oh,
What was that? Why do I think the Catholic Church, what?
no.
Should ditch the sacrament? I was joking.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
It just seems
Okay.
like a really hard question. I'm very
They're
curious.
beautiful. I mean, it's
Yes.
wow.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
no,
the question,
it's yeah.
caring and listening inside the sacramental framework. How do those things work together?
So, okay. It's about relationships. It's working with the groups of children and young people that you're working with and their parents. It's like what I was saying before. It really doesn't matter what you're doing. It's looking at what you're doing and asking the question, how am I making room for relationships? How am I really helping to build those relationships? So as the young people are coming into their confirmation class or time or virtual, video call, in whatever format you're in, it's, hey, how you guys doing this week? What was your high point? What was your low point? Give them the top 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is God in your life right now? Mm-hmm. Start paying attention to them. Start with them. It's what Jesus did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing too is that, especially when it comes to catechesis, what we believe, our faith always has a home, no matter what the life situation, right? But yet we're teaching from a perspective of where we expect the young people to find a home in it, and they may not find a home yet there or in that particular aspect of the faith that we're talking about, right? So how can we start with them and their life situations and bring the faith in, no matter what the concepts that we're talking about, and especially the sacraments, to bring that into their lives, to help them become aware of God's presence and action in their lives right now, right? Because when it comes to the sacraments, we receive them so that we can live them, right? And not graduate from them, right? So all of them. So how do we help them come to really realize that that's exactly what's going on, that God's grace is there? How do we help them become aware of that? You know, yeah, big questions, I know.
I think it's really, I was glad to see you go first, because I was tongue in cheek about how do we ditch the sacraments, because obviously that's not going to happen and should not happen. But it is critical that, you know, if young people are telling you that they don't think the sacraments are relevant because they think relationships are relevant, then that means we've done a really poor job of connecting our traditions to the modern day reality. So if we don't understand, like if we're not doing, you know, if young people don't understand the power of, like, pick a sacrament like Catholic communion, if young people don't understand the power of taking communion in the middle of a pandemic, then I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing a better job of not only explaining that, but living it out and articulating the history of, you know, how people have experienced this over time. Young people are intensely interested in that. They really are longing for these kinds of connections, not just to each other in the modern day, but these sort of historical connections. So I actually think that the sacramental framework is this incredible jumping off point to make those kinds of connections. Now, it's true, I think, what Maureen said, like, we didn't hear any young people talking about, I don't think a young person in all 150 plus interviews that we did use the word sacrament. Like, I don't think it ever came up in all the research. But that doesn't mean that they don't care about those kinds of rituals and that they're not interested in them. So it is sort of this longer, you know, you're in it for the long haul.
And I don't think they see the connection either, because again, the sacraments are rooted in relationships, right? It's relationship with God and it's relationship with the community. You can't have a sacrament without the community. But if the young people are not having an experience of a relationship with the community, well, then what relevance does the sacrament have? Because you know what, I can do me and God at home. Why do I need why? Right? And so, yeah, it's like, what can we be doing to better foster those connections? Because and that awareness.
Well, and connecting the sacraments to young people's everyday lives. Where do you need healing? Where do you need belonging? These sacraments celebrate those moments. Let's pull out your lived experience and embrace them with the sacraments so that they mean something and they are brought to life and connect us to one another.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, next question. Josh, I've read some of Christian Smith's work, and one of my main takeaways is the huge role that parents have. They are the relational authorities that are the central players in passing along the faith. My parish is moving toward a family faith formation program, as have many others. It seems to me that family faith formation is an important shift for us in the Catholic Church. Can you speak to this?
Sure. The families remain incredibly important, but it's important for us to understand just what we're talking about when we talk about families and all the diversity that comes along with that. You know, the pandemic has been really, as for one example, the pandemic has been really hard on lots of young people that my wife works with, because she works with a lot of young people where home is not a safe place. So this idea that somehow we're gonna take families along this journey because families are a safe and stable place for young people is to obscure the reality that's going on for lots and lots of young folks. So I would just keep that in mind. It's not me chastising you. It's just as much of it as a recognition of the reality that we don't whitewash this issue and make it seem like this is going to be the silver bullet here. Look, families are really important, but let's take a look at the trends that have happened over the last 30 years with the adults in many of these young people's lives, that they have also are the same people. It's not like this trend of moving away from the church or away from institutional affiliation of the church started a few weeks ago. This is something that's been in the works and has been well documented by scientists for a while. So in the places where families are still intact, I think they're vital. But if we're only focusing on families, then we're going to miss a whole lot of young people that we should be in relationship with and should be helping to guide along. So I wouldn't rely solely on that. or make assumptions that the families that you are engaging with have this like working knowledge and background or even language of faith that might have been the case, 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, family faith formation tends to be a real trend right now as a model. And I think within a parish community, there are lots of different needs and you can have lots of different models. Options. I find options are the biggest and best gift to give parents so that they can find what fits their family life and young people too, find what fits so that they can belong, even if their, families are not all that engaged or don't want to be all that engaged. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also it's like, faith formation is for all, right? In the parish. And so we want to make sure that mom and dad are getting faith formation at their level and that the children are getting faith formation at their level. And are there some things that we can be doing together? Absolutely. But again, I think that there are lots of different models. We don't want to, like Josh was saying, let's not lock into just one model because it's not going to fit everybody. It's not going to welcome everybody.
Mm-hmm. All right, Julie, I have a question for you. Given the emphasis on relationships for e-learning, what impact, positive or negative, is virtual learning and virtual classrooms going to create? My assessment so far is that I seem further removed from my students when interactions take place on Zoom only. What ideas do you have for this teacher, Julie?
Well, I
Or
haven't.
thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't have to teach in a Zoom setting in a classroom, so I don't know. But I'm imagining that a lot of the same strategies that make in-classroom environments healthy and productive and successful are, knowing your students' names, having a card so that you're calling on them by name, that you're engaging with them and not letting them just sink away from the camera, to make sure that that the students feel seen and feel heard, asking questions. I think now more than ever that we need a tip of the iceberg approach to content. Is that what are the most important things in this unit or whatever that I want to get across, and focus on that for learning? What do they have to know? And then focus on them. How are you? How did this go? How's your family? Those get them talking, because no matter if you're on a Zoom call or in a classroom, if students think that the expectation is that they can sit back and be quiet and get away with it and disengage for the whole hour and no one's going to call them on it, that's the environment you're going to develop. If they're called on by name, if you work with them, if they, I don't know, you work with them to figure out what they do know so that they can share and participate in the classroom. Creating, games and icebreakers so that students are involved. The teacher sets the tone, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of prayer. It takes a lot of energy, whether it's a Catholic high school classroom, a middle school classroom, or a parish religious education program. Those, focusing on who they are so that their presence makes a difference in the learning, I think is of utmost importance. And what better time for them to be seen, known, heard than right now.
Wonderful. We have a couple of questions that are related. The first one I'll shoot to you, Josh. How do we, as the Catholic Church, build trust with young people who are questioning their gender identity, especially since their perception of our church is that we are anti-homosexual, etc.? We have one related that I'll pitch next.
Okay. This is critical. I mean, it's the I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I want to be very clear that there's a real limit to what you can do here. It is, it's not that I don't want to slap you on the wrist and like be language police, but I want to be very clear about how young people see this. It's not that they perceive that the church is anti-homosexual. For them, the church is anti-homosexual. And that doesn't mean, though, and here's the part that's really important about this, is that increasingly that is not necessarily the end of that conversation for them. If you're engaged in enough of the other kinds of places and spaces that they're interested in, they will not overlook, that core part of their identity, in it, and just sort of do away with it. But I think we do young people a disservice when we think that they are unwilling or unable to hold two things in their heads at one time, and to think that everything is a deal breaker. Certainly, young people, just maturity levels for all things tend to be more towards the extremes, less nuanced, more black and white on things. That's true for every young person forever about all things, especially those things that are core to their identity. But we can do a lot of other things and show up in a lot of other spaces where we can at least be in the conversation for them. Look, what's happened, the best way to think about Gen Z with their faith is as reconstructionists. The faith that's been handed down by their older millennial parents and Gen X parents is one that has largely been deconstructed. And Gen Z is sort of casting around, like looking at all these pieces on the ground, not just of their religious lives, but of all social institutions, trying to figure out, like, how do I reassemble this? Like, how do I build anything out of this? And your job, I think, at this point should really be trying to stay in the conversation for as long as you possibly can, to be helping them to figure out how to lay that foundation, not to show them this amazing house that could be built if one knew how, but to be there on the job site with them as they're trying to figure out if this is a 2x4 and what do I do with a screwdriver and how do I use this nail gun. Now, have I completely killed the metaphor yet? I hope so. But that's the goal isn't to win confirmation with young people. It's just not a transactional generation like it might have been at one time. We need to stay in that conversation. If you really want to impact their faith lives, they're not going to be even remotely fully formed, for a long time. And so even with these diversity conversations and the sexuality conversation, gender identity conversations, we want to be in those conversations until they absolutely shut the door and kick us out. Right. So when we lead with this, Katie, I think, said this in the chat, when we lead with these all or nothing approaches, well, you're getting the boot. Right. And mostly what you're going to end up there is you're going to end up on the outside of that door. And if that's how you want to start, then okay. But what I'm suggesting is that there's another approach where we just try and stay attached to that conversation as they assemble those pieces for as long as we possibly can, because the days of being able to get those quick wins, I think, they're over. The social landscape has shifted.
Excellent. The follow-up question, I'll shoot to Julie and Maureen. There exists a struggle, and this is from Katie, she put this in the chat, the panelist chat. There exists a struggle with self-defined non-binary students and students questioning acceptance of all relationships within the church, particularly as they relate to family members and or themselves. So the sacrament of marriage is sometimes one they deem not necessary, outdated, or exclusionary. How do we emphasize inclusion for all and support them in this space?
Julie?
Wow.
It's a really good question.
It is such a good question.
And it's so deeply important.
I think it's so vital that we just love young people. The conversations that this generation is having about gender identity are like nothing I've ever seen before. But what's moving these questions is this deep desire to know oneself and to be known. So bring it on. And I think to place any judgment on it goes back to Katie's point of setting up all or nothing choices. Love them, love them, love them. And, be very careful about what kinds of sin takes precedent that, for sexual orientation, for gender identity, to imply that these young people are sinful locks the door that Josh was talking about. And it's a thick door that'll never be opened again. And how dare we lock a door between us and a young person who is looking to be supported. That's my guttural reaction anyway.
I think it's lovely. I have a question for Maureen from Anne. I have been teaching 8th grade religion for a long time. I am here because I see the disengagement and I want to help make the change. I wholeheartedly agree with everything being said. I've been working on meeting the kids where they're at, building relationships. Good job, Anne. And building trust. Even that's amazing.
Great.
But how do we help the church help them feel like they belong and are an important part of the faith community?
It's good. Kudos to you. It sounds like you're doing an excellent job. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop that. Now it's about going beyond. So how can we connect these young people? Because you know them well. So how do we connect them with other people within the parish community? Different areas of ministry, ways that they can start belonging and contributing in new ways that are going to help them really feel like they matter and that what they're contributing matters and makes a difference. Because again, developmentally, this is huge right now. They want to make a difference and they need to see that difference. So how can we connect them? And that's really our role, right? We're like bridge builders. How can we connect them to the other people in the parish community and help them to build relationships and not just say, oh, go see Mary down the hall. No. We got to hang out with them and, make them feel comfortable. But to really help make those connections for them and their families and the parents too. I just want to mention the parents too, because, it's like the parents are also feeling disengaged. So how can we connect parents and help them to feel like they matter and belong as well? So again, just questions to keep in the back of our minds, to bring to our teams and our staffs and our pastoral councils and our committees, and to start having these conversations, because really the answers are going to come from within your parish communities, within your school communities, because you know your people best, right? Listen to them and take that to heart. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think we're going to need to wrap up here. I have one last question. I'll pose it to Josh, and then Maureen will close us out.
Mm-hmm.
Jim shares, I wrestle on one hand with people who say they aren't institutional, yet brand or team institutional loyalty seems so high. Apple versus Android, or love for a professional sports team, even if they're upset that a bad play was called, jersey colors changed, or if you're a Vikings fan. They don't leave it like they do the church. What is the real core issue there? Is it belonging, issues with authority?
Great question. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one to send us,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we see, in meaning making, we explored these values that drive young people to engage with any organization, volunteer, nonprofit, faith-based, for-profit, et cetera. And what we find is like we get intense amounts of loyalty to particular organizations that exhibit those kinds of values, among them being, I think I've got it right here, the things like inclusion, accountability, authenticity, welcoming, relational, growthful, mindful, impactful. When we find organizations living out those 8 values or some combination of them, then we're going to see much higher levels of engagement and commitment. But I would just caution Jim here to be a little, I don't know if the commitment runs quite as deep as you might think. That what we're sort of uncovering this year and probably going to write about in State of Religion Young People 2021, is this idea that young people never completely feel at home anywhere, but they also, by virtue of these fractured identities, they never feel completely alone anywhere either. They can always find some piece of themselves or something else so I think it gives the appearance a lot of times as though there are these commitments, but I'm not sure how deep they really run, because there's just not a home in the same way that there might have been a home, institutionally, either because of the college you chose to go to or the place where you worship for people maybe, my generation or older.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have thoughts regarding that question? Julie or Maureen? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending this evening. I'm going to let Maureen close us out with a little reflection. It's been such an enriching discussion.
So let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. And I'm going to invite you at this time to just sit back in your chair and take a deep breath, to close your eyes. And I'd like you to think back now to your own childhood and your own adolescence. And who was one impactful adult in your life then? What about that person made such a difference for you? I bet it had everything to do with relationship, the care they showed you, and for what was happening in your life then, and the way they were present and really listened to you. In this moment, I'd invite you to send blessing upon that person now. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Thank you for taking the time to care and to listen and to engage this evening. As we go forth from this moment together, may each of us be the change we wish to see, beginning with ourselves. Let us be intentional and lead the way with our staffs and teams and committees about being present to building and nurturing relationships with the children and the young people and their parents, taking interest and care in them and their lives. May you find us, Lord, being more like you each day. And may God bless us as we make our prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint John Baptiste de La Salle, pray for us. Live Jesus in our hearts forever. Let us go forth to love and serve God and one another. And thank you again for joining us this evening.